Thank you for joining me for this video. I want to talk to you again about shadow work. I've had more questions about doing good shadow work than just about anything else from all the videos that I've done. And there is really some simple things that we can implement when it comes to doing shadow work that will really help us. But we have to understand how the shadow came to be in the first place. If we can understand how our shadow self came to be in the first place, then that really empowers us to understand what we need to do to undo the shadow. The shadow is actually the reflection, if you will. I mean, shadow really is a good term. I love that Carl Jung came up with that. It's the outline or the effect, that's a better way to say it. It is the effect of the social self. It's the effect of the self that we believe we have to be in order to be accepted and in order to be loved by other people. You know, you spend the first 7 years of your life in a state of complete openness mentally while your brain develops. It's almost as though the first 7 years of our life we spend in a deep state of hypnosis, and we receive then all of the suggestions and messages and information that is around us without having any ability to block it out or do critical thinking or judge for ourselves. And so it's in the first 7 years that the social self is really being developed, and the social self is being developed primarily within our family of origin, within our larger family, cousins, aunts, uncles, those kinds of things, and our early experiences with those in authority like teachers, and also with other children and our peers. It's in those first 7 years that we are figuring out what it takes to get our needs met, what it takes to be loved and accepted and to connect with the world around us. And so we receive a myriad of messages from our culture and those around us about what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable behavior or acceptable for the social self to get those needs met, and what is unacceptable. The problem is that while we're growing up, we're experiencing, if you think about a child, you're experiencing the broad range and myriad of emotions and feelings that you can have as a child. So you may grow up in a home where you're experiencing a lot of anger, and mom and dad don't like that because it disrupts the family unit. And they're trying to teach you how to gain acceptance based on whatever their social beliefs are. And so maybe you get this message that it's not okay to be angry, that you shouldn't be angry. And so you begin to deny those aspects of ourselves. And the development of our own shadow really is very individual and personal, in the sense that the more we internalize the messages around us, and the more we develop our own hatred or ideas about what should or shouldn't be, or who we should or who we shouldn't be, the more we will suppress and reject parts of ourselves. See, if you hate yourself and you say, I should never get angry, or this part of me that's crying is weak and therefore unacceptable, or this part of me that's experiencing some kind of sexual pleasure, oh, sexual pleasure is bad and unacceptable. And if we continue to send ourselves messages that we shouldn't be that way or that we should be another way, then what we do is we actually turn off our own consciousness to be able to recognize those parts within ourselves. It's basically like we're sending messages, hypnotic suggestions to ourselves that says, this part is unacceptable, I want to do away with it, and I don't want to see it anymore. And so in that way, we actually kind of commit this sort of self-murder. We sort of kill parts of ourselves off. The only problem is they don't really die. They just become, I heard one person call it exiles, and I really like that. I don't know who originated that, but that's a great way to think about it. We have these exiled selves that have trauma, that have fear, that have anger, that has whatever it is that we decided was not acceptable. So you can see then we put forth this social self, which is who we should be, who we ought to be, and who we believe we must be. And then we exile the parts of ourselves that don't fit that, and that then becomes our collective shadow. So we have all kinds of various different exiles. At some point in life, for most of us, especially if we pick a spiritual path, we begin to try to deal with our shadow. A lot of it comes through self-improvement, self-help. If you were indoctrinated in religion, then you've got to rid yourself of those sinful parts of yourself. And while the intentions there are good, because I think our intention is to heal and become whole, it really contributes to the problem, because we just end up doing more of the same. We just end up with more self-hatred. We just end up exiling those parts of ourselves even further. And then the psychological trick that we play on ourselves is we can create the fantasy of who we are, or the fantasy about what our life is. And then we live within that fantasy. And the more we live within that fantasy, then whatever doesn't match with that fantasy, we end up suppressing and rejecting, which makes the fantasy stronger and makes it harder for us to see the parts of ourselves that really are crying out for love and healing. And then we end up just sort of feeling empty, and can end up feeling like we're living this sort of secondhand life. So much so that we can feel totally emotionally disconnected and like we're just going through the motions. And so you can see then, I hope, that the shadow self develops as a result of all the shoulds, all the oughts, all the musts, all the rules, you could say, socially, that the social self assimilates and says, okay, I've got to be this way in order to get my needs met. I've got to be this way in order to be loved. And all these other parts of me, I'm going to hate and disown and reject and suppress. So the key to all of it actually is the ability to suspend judgment. And I keep saying that, but judgment is a really sneaky thing. And one of the ways that judgment shows up in our lives is through our language. And anything that we attach a should to, an ought to, a must to, I should be like this. I should do my shadow work. I should forgive. I should be a loving person. I ought to be over this by now. I should be further along by now. I must get this done if I'm going to ascend and let the light of God flow through me. See, anytime we add that kind of language, should, ought, must, there's a judgment behind that, because those types of words are what's known in neuro-linguistic programming as modal operators of necessity. Modal operator meaning this is the modality with which we choose to express ourselves and operate in the world, and necessity meaning that we have to have this in order to, I don't know, most of the times it's a mystery to us. But if you say I should be a certain way, you're saying it's of necessity that I be this way. Not this is just one option of how I might express myself in this situation or in this moment, or this is one of many choices that I might have. We lock ourselves in and say I should be this way. That means I have no choice but to be that way. And when you put that kind of necessity, you put pressure on yourself. And when those parts of you that feel exiled feel that pressure, they're used to that. The old mechanism just kicks in and they're like, oh yes, I remember my place. I shouldn't express myself this way. I should stay in the dark. I'm somehow hated and unacceptable. And I'm a problem to sort of the collective us of our own internal psyche. And those parts don't allow themselves to come to the light. And the first part of shadow work is when all those parts of ourself that we've disowned, when we begin to own them again, we begin to reintegrate with them. And they come out of the shadows and come back into the light of our consciousness. But as long as we're sitting there shoulding on ourselves, then they can't come into our consciousness. Now, the alternative to modal operators of necessity is to begin to use a language that implies choice, that implies permission, and that doesn't carry the same emotional baggage of it has to be this way. When we say that we should be a certain way or that things should be a certain way, we are demanding that life and ourselves be that way, once again, rather than giving an option. So there's a totally different feeling when you say to yourself, I should forgive this person because I'm a loving person and hate is bad, and so I should forgive this person, is a completely different feeling than I could forgive this person, I might forgive this person, I can forgive this person. Has a completely different and much, much, much more empowering feeling to it. And so again, if we suspend our judgments and realize we don't have to be fixed, and even our shadow self doesn't have to be fixed, it needs to be accepted, it needs to be loved, it needs to be actually brought into realization and actualization, that really inside your shadow self, you'll find a lot of your power, a lot of your strength, a lot of your ability that you've cut yourself off from. You find a lot of psychic energy there that you can then begin to use to build the kind of life that you want to build. But as long as you are, again, rejecting those things, it becomes very difficult to do. So I want to encourage you today, or whatever time you're watching this, to stop shoulding on yourself. Just pay attention to your language. Pay attention to the way you're thinking. Every time you're saying, I should this, just realize you're shoulding all over the place. You're shoulding all over yourself. And that just makes a mess. So anyway, I hope this helped you. I'll continue doing some more videos on shadow work. Whatever time it is there for you, I hope it's great. And God bless you.